In Lisbon there is a painting that most visitors walk straight past. It hangs quietly in a museum filled with golden altarpieces and saints. The kind of art meant to lift your eyes towards heaven, to make you feel calm, humble, maybe even safe. And then there is this. A small wooden panel, barely a meter and a half wide, packed from edge to edge with horror. There is no date, no signature, no name for the person who painted it. Only a title added centuries later by someone trying to describe the nightmare in front of them. Inferno. Hell. And once you understand what is really happening inside this frame, you will see why this painting spent almost 300 years hidden. This is Inferno, painted in oil and tempera on oak somewhere between 1510 and 1520, by an artist history simply calls the unknown Portuguese master. It measures about 119 by 217 centimeters, roughly the size of a small dining table, and today it lives in the Museu Nacional de Arte Antiga, Portugal's National Gallery of Historic Art in Lisbon. We don't know who commissioned it. We don't even know who painted it. What we do know is this. Nothing else in Portuguese art of the period looks like it. There is no other surviving Portuguese painting from this era that takes hell itself and makes it the entire subject. Just hell, alone, total. Look at the composition first before the details pull your eye apart, because the structure is doing something deliberate. The scene takes place underground, in a kind of stone cavity lit only by fire. In the upper right corner there's an opening, a hole in the world above through which the damned are still falling. Figures tumble down mid-air, arriving into a chamber that's already full. This wasn't the artist's invention. It's borrowed from a much older medieval tradition, especially from a popular story called The Visions of Tundale, a 12th century tale about a knight who dies, tours hell, and comes back changed. That story gave European artists a whole visual vocabulary for the underworld. The pit, the cauldron, the funnel-shaped mouth of hell swallowing souls. By 1510 this imagery had been circulating for over 300 years. But here's where our unknown master starts breaking from the script. First glance, the painting seems to follow a familiar map of damnation. Its organizing logic is the 7 deadly sins, the standard moral architecture of medieval and Renaissance Christianity. But what makes this image so disturbing is not the framework, it is the precision. These are not random tortures. This is not generic suffering. Every punishment has been designed to fit the scene with almost precise cruelty. On the left, pride hangs upside down. 3 naked women are suspended by their feet above a clay brazier. Their bodies twist. Their hair has already begun to burn. And this is not an accidental arrangement. Art historians have pointed out that these 3 figures are a deliberate corruption of the 3 graces, the elegant trio from Greco-Roman mythology, symbols of beauty, charm, and harmony. Here, that classical image has been turned into a nightmare. Beauty is not admired, it is inverted and burned from the head down. Nearby, greed receives its own punishment. A man is forced to swallow gold coins. But the detail is sharper than it first appears. These are not just generic coins. nor abstract symbols of wealth. They have been identified as cruzados, real Portuguese currency minted under King Manuel I. In other words, the money of the Portuguese crown itself is being pushed down the throat of the damned. Gluttony sits close by. A goat-horned demon forces the sinner to drink wine from a wineskin shaped like a pig. And then at the dead center of the painting comes sloth. A cauldron boils over the flames. Inside it 5 figures suffer. At least 2 have tonsured heads, the shabby crowns of Catholic monks. But one figure is stranger than the rest. A Franciscan friar sits inside the cauldron fully clothed. His face lifted upward, strangely calm, almost untouched by the agony around him. Even in hell he does nothing. The sloth that shaped his life has followed him into damnation. It has become part of him. At the far end of the panel is lust. 2 lovers are bound together by a cord, trapped in one another's company even in agony. They cannot separate. Their desire has become their chain. Scholars have long noticed how closely this scene resembles Dante's Inferno, suggesting that whoever designed this painting knew not only the Bible, but Italian literature as well. And then in the foreground there is a smaller, stranger detail. A figure is clamped between wooden boards, forced to swallow something that looks like a pearl and still inside its shell. This may be envy, but not envy in the old abstract sense. This is envy shaped by a new world, by the treasures, shells, pearls, and exotic goods that the ocean was beginning to carry back to Europe. And that is where the painting begins to change, because beneath all this medieval theology, something else is entering the frame, something new. Central cauldron, presiding over the entire scene, sits the king of the demons. He wears medieval armor on his body, but on his head is a crown of bright, elaborate feathers, a headdress that art historians have identified as belonging to the Tupinamba people of Brazil. He sits on an ornate chair, likely of Indo-Portuguese craftsmanship, furniture in a style that was, at the time, arriving in Lisbon from Portuguese trading posts in India. In his hand, a large ivory horn, carved in a style associated with West Africa. Sit with that combination for a second. Brazil, India, and Africa, the 3 frontiers of the Portuguese maritime empire, all fused into the wardrobe of Satan himself, in a painting made at the exact moment those empires were being built. Portugal in 1510 was in the middle of one of the most explosive periods of global contact in human history. Vasta Gama had reached India in 1498. Pedro Alves Cabral had landed in Brazil in 1500. Portuguese ships were now returning to Lisbon loaded with spices, ivory, gold, and reports of people, animals, and customs Europeans had never conceived of. Here's where it gets genuinely uncomfortable and genuinely interesting, because historians don't fully agree on what this fusion is doing. One reading, This is Portugal processing the moral cost of its own empire. The damned in this painting aren't foreigners. They're white European Christians, some of them clergy. The sins being punished are Christian sins. The gold being forced down a sinner's throat is Portuguese gold. Read this way, the painting isn't only alienating the New World, it's using the imagery of the New World to accuse Europe of its own corruption. Everything the Empire was bringing home becomes, in hell, an instrument of torture rather than a luxury. Scholars have pointed to these objects, the feathers, the throne, the horn, as markers meant to place the scene in a very specific elsewhere, an imagined space increasingly associated with Brazil and South America in the European mind. But there's a second, darker reading art historians take seriously too. The tormentors, the demons doing the punishing, are painted with dark skin, and several are depicted as hermaphroditic, blurring categories of gender the same way they blur categories of species. That's not a neutral artistic choice at the time in Europe. It reflects and reinforces the idea that evil itself looks foreign, looks other, looks like the newly discovered world. Even while it's Christians being punished, the punishers are coded as coming from outside Europe. Both readings are probably true at once. This painting can be a bold moral critique of European greed and a document of the ethnocentric imagination that justified colonization. The same decades that Portuguese ships were also carrying enslaved people from West Africa. The painting doesn't resolve that tension. It just contains it, unresolved, in oil and temper, on a piece of oak that outlived every person who could tell us what its painter actually meant. There's a second layer here, separate from the colonial imagery, and is arguably just as bold for its time. Look again at who's suffering in that central cauldron, Tom Surratt's, a Franciscan friar. This painting places clergy, men who had taken vows of poverty and humility, directly among the damned, right at the visual center of the composition. And over on the last side of the panel, some scholars have argued that the chained pair isn't just any couple. It may be a nude friar bound to a male companion, a possible reference to what the period would have condemned as sodomy among the clergy. If that reading is correct, it is a Portuguese painting openly accusing churchmen of corruption and same-sex desire, painted at a moment when the church held enormous power over what could and couldn't be shown in art. This is not subtle social commentary. This is a direct attack, and depending on how the Inquisition read it, the artist may have been risking his life by painting it. Who painted something this strange, this specific, and this dangerous? We don't know. There is no signature, no documented commission, no contemporary record of the work at all. What art historians can say is that its style points towards the workshop culture of early 16th century Lisbon, a city where Portuguese, Flemish, classical, medieval and colonial visuals worlds were all colliding at once. And this painting borrows from all of them. The cauldron and falling souls come from the medieval visions of hell, especially the tradition of the vision of Tundel. The chained lovers echo Dante's Inferno. The three graces come from classical mythology, transformed here into punished, burning figures of vanity. And the demons? Those impossible bodies fused with animals and monsters clearly speak the language of Flemish painting. Portugal had deep artistic and commercial ties with Flanders. Flemish artists worked in Lisbon, some settled there, and in the same years this hell was being painted, Portuguese manuscripts were also beginning to visualize the new world of Brazil, including some of the earliest European images of indigenous Brazilians in feather dress. And then the painting disappeared. For almost 300 years there is no written record of it, nothing. Given what it shows, explicit female nudity, clerical corruption, and possibly a friar implicated in sexual sin, that silence is not hard to understand. Under the Inquisition, an image like this could have been destroyed. Instead, it seems to have survived by staying hidden. It only reappears after 1834, when Portugal's liberal government dissolved the religious orders and confiscated their property. Whatever convent that kept this painting out of sight lost custody of it, and from there it entered the Royal, later National Academy of Fine Arts in Lisbon, and eventually the Museu Nacional de Arte Antiga, where it remains today. So there is one final irony. The very religious world this painting seems to attack may also be the reason it survived. 500 years later, Inferno still resists a tidy explanation. It's a moral lecture about greed that borrows the aesthetics of the people the Son Empire was exploiting. It's a satire so sharp it may have mocked its own clergy for corruption and desire, and survived only by hiding from the very church it was aimed at. It's a patchwork of medieval legend, Dante, Greek mythology, Flemish nightmare painting, and eyewitness reports from the other side of the Atlantic, stitched together by a painter whose name we will never recover.